I got a bit grumpy putting these slides together. I might start with a bit of a rant because I've been reusing these slides for about 10 years now. So this is the way we currently design buildings in this sort of long, just a linear process, right? We design the building, we build it, we give the client the keys, and then we take the photos for Architecture New Zealand, and then we walk off and design the next one. There's a few problems with that. It's quite entrenched though, and the reason it's entrenched, we have these CRC guidelines which basically set this all up, kind of. The CRC guidelines basically only cover the design, but project managers love CRC guidelines because they just have a checklist there, and when they don't get to tick a box, the project manager gets to yell at someone, right? So there's a big gap though, I think, particularly in the handover, and the handover is quite critical. I think our buildings are actually suffering because of this. I think the CRC guidelines particularly don't mention don't mention the commissioning very much at all. So this is the way we probably want to do it, which is where we close the loop between design and performance. And then certainly as designers, we get to look at the performance, analyse it, and then apply whatever we've learnt from that previous building onto the next one. So we don't just finish with the photos. We actually make sure we stay involved, assess the building, look at how it's performing, tweak it if we have to, make sure we keep the client happy, and then we learn from it. I've said designers really benefit from this, which is the obvious thing to say, but I think landlords also benefit from this as well, a big portfolio owners, shall we say. And there's normally a bit of toing and froing in this tweaking and assessment which goes on, this sort of fine-tuning business which you might have heard of. So this, interestingly, or not, this has been worked out and it's been applied in the latest RIBA plan of works, which is the UK equivalent of the CIC guidelines, right? So they go right through the aftercare, post-occupancy evaluation, actually checking up on the design to make sure the building works as it intended. So I understand the CIC, although I've just bagged them for the last 2 minutes, the CIC guidelines are being rewritten at the moment, so hopefully they might take a bit of a lesson from RIBA. We'll see. So that's the end of my rant. Here we go. This is apologies to Argosy because this isn't the most flattering photo of the building. I forgot to say it's in Wellington for those who don't know. For those who didn't know, you could probably guess by the weather in that photo. If you're from Australia, this is called rain. Yeah. So you can see the bottom 8 floors were built in 1940. It's got that sort of nice, probably semi-Art Deco feel to it, and that's historically listed. And then in 1990 something or other, 3 more floors were added onto the top, and we won't talk about them so much. It's about just over 6,000 square metres, so not too small, not too big. Important to point out, this was a base building refit, so the fit out wasn't altered at all. The base building services were completely redone, but the carpets were actually ripped out from under the internal partitions, and all the ceilings were taken off and whole new in-ceiling works put in. So that's again, HVAC, lighting, and a brand new ceiling. They had a pretty gross, again, I think the last fit out was from the 80s, so it needed a bit of work. It had one of those perforated metal, sort of gunmetal ceilings, not particularly attractive. And so a standard ceiling went in with LED lights and whiz-bang kit. I'll get onto that in a minute. So, I should point out, Argosy did a lot of work, a lot of research before actually sitting around the table and coming up with a design. So first up, and please take note, I'm up here just sort of getting all the glory, but there were other people involved. So Energy Technical Services did an energy audit of the building prior to starting any work. There was a bunch of services options and lift options were looked at by NDY. We had other energy efficiency and environmental options, that's again NDY, Ecosystems, ourselves, and then lots and lots of talking between Argosy and the tenant. So TPK, government tenant, they're signing a nice long lease, so Argosy want to make sure they keep the tenant happy. I think TPK were actually looking to re-sign a lease, so that might have been a bit of a motivation as well. So we set some targets, or at least Argosy did. The target was a 20% reduction in energy use, which the before picture was just over 200 kilowatt hours metre square per year, and the after intent at least was 160. Now that's the whole building all wrapped up. And we also targeted a 4-star built rating. Now, Argosy reckoned that there's more value in a built rating than there is in a design rating. I think that's probably a reasonably popular opinion going around. Just design rating is the promise and a built rating is the fulfillment of that promise. So looking at it, we actually worked out we could probably get 5 stars reasonably easily. No, I don't want to say easily. We still had to push some things, but we got there. Spoiler. So existing buildings, so we had some limitations, obviously. First one, the big one, was this existing historic facade, right? If we touched that in any way, historic places would have got really grumpy with us. So it's an uninsulated, basically concrete, stone-clad facade with small single glazed windows and these quite nice sort of ornate brass frames. Quite bad for daylighting, arguably quite good for to keep the sun out though, but there we go. We had the riser sizes were existing, so we couldn't just whack in huge amounts of fresh air and hope to cool the building, use free cooling. We couldn't use sort of heat pump heating or 4-pipe chillers to try and provide the heating as well, because the riser sizes were too small for the low temperature pipe work. As I said, the ceilings came out, so brand new ceiling works, new lights, these new EC fan coils, which I think this was quite new at the time, but they're all over the place now. And the central plant was had it, so it needed replacing anyway. And I think the key thing just to take note of there, we were putting in a larger chiller capacity-wise, and actually a smaller boiler, smaller, more efficient boilers. So we were expecting that the overall energy use and the gas we'd gain there, but we were expecting the electricity use to go up because the chiller was just bigger. And the last thing, just in terms of the water efficiency, we just refitted all the fittings. With an existing building, can be quite hard to retrofit rainwater recycling. Sorry, Carl. Okay, so the actual build process, we delivered it sort of a floor at a time. When I say we, I mean High-Tech Interiors delivered it. The client was decanted out. This made the commissioning a bit tricky, so we sort of had to commission the individual floors as they came online, and somewhere in between there, the central services were done as well. And then once it was all finished, we had to recommission the building again. We had independent commissioning agent, that was Ecosystems, who also looked after the fine-tuning period. In the fine-tuning period, you might have heard people talk about this 4 seasons commissioning, right, or 12-month fine-tuning, and that's just making sure that the building actually works when it's actually designed to work. So, we design the air conditioning systems to work on the hottest day of summer and the heating systems to work on the coldest day of winter. And we don't really get to test that if we only do the commissioning in like 2 weeks in September or something like that. So we need to make sure that we're actually looking after the building all year, and the building is looking after its people. And just to be sure, we did it for 24 months instead of just 12. As part of that, we monitored the ongoing water and energy. And then at the end of all that, we did a post-occupancy evaluation. Now, post-occupancy evaluation, are people familiar with that? Yep, a few people, most people are nodding, that's good. Some people think it's just taking the photos for Architecture New Zealand. So we actually surveyed the occupants, but we'll come to that later. So this is what happened. There's 2 things to see in this graph. The most obvious one is before and after. We went from around about 200 to around about 150, so that's a 25% saving, give or take. And then we've got, I'll see if I can do this without flicking a slide on accidentally. We like to think we've got this lovely downslope here where we're actually looking after the building, and by basically just through tweaking controls, we're actually managing to get the building to reduce its energy use. Some of the more observant among you might have noticed that we've got gas. The more observant people at the front who can read the legend would see that this is gas, this is electricity, and the gas use has stayed about the same, which is kind of different from what we thought would happen, but the massive saving has been in the electricity. And that's, we believe, largely due to the lighting. That's LED versus fluorescence, basically. Obviously, save money in lighting costs, lighting energy, and also the cooling energy as well. So that's looking good. I realised when we put the slides together, we've been a bit slack on the water, because we only really did it for the first sort of 12 months and then fell by the wayside. So bad us. We'll keep, I've added that to the list, right? So And this other thing is this post-occupancy evaluation. Now there's many varied ways of doing post-occupancy evaluation, and we're building services engineers, so we use what gets called the BUS methodology, which is now run by ARUP, or administered by ARUP. It's a post-occupancy evaluation method, which is basically, it was very much written by engineers for services engineers. So it's very much aimed at, are you warm enough or too hot or too cold in the summer, winter, is it too noisy? And it doesn't really look too much at what, say, a more architectural post-occupancy evaluation might look at, which is a bit more sort of design focused or needs focused. But I say there are plenty of other ways of doing this. This is just the one we picked. I know JASMAX have one, their own in-house one, I believe. So we've got these graphs here which you can't read. You can probably see the black dot. The black dot is this is TPK here, and what you can't see is all the white dots which form this sort of line. So TPK, out of all the buildings in New Zealand which have also used this survey method, we're sitting at about in the top 20%, which is pretty good. There are some issues, not helped by the fact that we carried out the survey when they were A, working on the lifts, and B, building 15 Stout Street right next door. So people complained about the lifts and construction noise, funnily enough. That's sort of bad timing on our part. You can read what you like into this productivity score. I know obviously productivity is a very funny thing to try and measure. This literally just does ask people, what do you reckon about this building? How does it affect your productivity? And it asks people to tick a line on a scale. So you can argue that 6 point, it doesn't mean you can fire 6.7% of your staff. But every other building in New Zealand which has done this same survey, the average for that is negative 1 point something or other. So we're better than the average using the same survey. So that's quite good. Yeah, but on average, buildings reduce your productivity. So work outside. The thing I like is this high forgiveness score. Now forgiveness is just this funny metric which is only really used by this BUS methodology, but it's a really good one. It's basically a measure of how much people like the building and how, I suppose, how much they forgive its weird quirks and foibles, which is actually really quite important. They're prepared to forgive aspects of, I don't want to say poor performance, perhaps underperformance, because they understand the intent behind the building and they just liked being in it. So I think that's actually quite a good metric, and I think it's one we should concentrate on more. Again, I'm not sure if I'm legally allowed to associate this logo with the building, because you see our NABERS rating expired in September, but I got told I had to mention the sponsor's product. So everyone get a NABERS rating, nutritious and delicious. Our rated energy, say, call it 90, and that was pretty much bang in the middle of the 4-star band, I suppose. And the other improvements and things we've done since then, they've improved their energy use, but probably not enough to get, say, another 1/2 star. So we are re-rating the building. There's nothing nefarious about that. It's just that there were some tenant works went on, and as part of the tenant works, some of the meters got kicked or bumped and the wires fell out. So we need to actually get some more data. And this is my last slide, you'll be glad to know. So we're not perfect, so there are still some things to work on, right? So there was heat reclaim designed off the back of the chiller to try and preheat the domestic hot water. We're not entirely convinced that ever worked or is working, so that's something which still needs investigation. Our boiler controls, we're not necessarily sure they're working properly, not cascading properly, but that's the sort of thing we can only really test in the depths of winter. So it's quite hard. You sort of come up with a theory and then you test it, and then you have to wait 8 months again before you can come up with another theory. And as I said, the water consumption, we probably haven't been keeping very good track of that, and we need to do better there. I would say, had we done the project now, we would probably, rather than targeting something like a Green Star rating, well, a Green Star rating is still useful, still has its place, but we would probably target a NABERS rating on the outcome of it. And some new office buildings going up right now are actually doing that. But at the time, NABERS wasn't around, so NABERS New Zealand. All right, that's my last slide. Does anybody have any questions? Are we doing questions now? Yeah, okay.
Your continuous loop model in terms of the tweaking piece, do you think you're going to get additional gains in terms of design going forward? So are you learning more from that second stage for design?
Yeah, correct. So it's always useful as designers designers get the most benefit out of that. We're being a bit selfish saying this is how everyone should do it because we win. But in the case of Argosy, for example, this refit project happened, we finished 2013, sorry, and then immediately after that, not hard on the heels, their building right next door, 15 Stout Street, the IMBY building, was also renovated and underwent a very similar process. And so some of the things we learned here were managed to be applied to that building there. So that's good from their perspective as well, yeah. And obviously the next building and the next one and the next one, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.